Beneath the polished surface of technological progress and material abundance, modern life in 2025 is facing a quiet but profound crisis. It does not announce itself with explosions or economic collapse. Instead, it seeps slowly into everyday experience. It is felt in restless minds that cannot truly rest, in exhausted bodies that sleep yet never feel restored, and in a persistent sense of unease that follows people even in moments of apparent success. Anxiety has become a constant background noise. Burnout is no longer an exception but an expected stage of adulthood. Digital overwhelm shapes the rhythm of daily life, fragmenting attention and quietly eroding inner stability. We live in an age where information is endless and instantly accessible. Yet clarity feels increasingly rare. The modern individual is exposed to more stimuli in a single day than previous generations encountered in a lifetime. Notifications compete for attention. Algorithms shape desires, and social platforms blur the boundary between personal identity and public performance. The mind is rarely allowed to settle. Even silence is filled with scrolling, streaming, and mental comparison. This relentless engagement creates a state of low-grade stress that never fully resolves, keeping the nervous system in a constant posture of readiness and tension. Burnout has followed naturally from this condition. Productivity is celebrated, speed is rewarded, and rest is often treated as a weakness rather than a necessity. Many people measure their worth through output, visibility, and constant availability. Over time, this produces emotional numbness, chronic fatigue, and a sense of inner emptiness that no achievement seems able to fill. What makes burnout especially insidious is that it often occurs not from failure, but from prolonged success within a system that never allows genuine recovery. In response to this crisis, modern society offers countless coping mechanisms. Self-help books promise quick transformations. Wellness industries sell relaxation in the form of apps, supplements, and weekend retreats. Therapy and medication, while invaluable for many, are often approached as tools to help individuals function better within the same stressful conditions rather than to question the conditions themselves. Mindfulness is popularized as a technique for productivity, stripped of its deeper purpose. These methods may provide temporary relief, but for many, the underlying dissatisfaction remains untouched. The limitation of these approaches lies in their surface-level focus. They often aim to manage symptoms rather than investigate their roots. Anxiety is treated as a chemical imbalance or a scheduling problem. Burnout is addressed with time management strategies or motivational language. Digital overwhelm is solved by yet another digital tool. While these solutions are not inherently wrong, they rarely ask the most fundamental question: what is the nature of the mind that suffers, and why does it suffer in the first place? This is where an ancient body of wisdom enters the conversation in an unexpected way. The Pāli Canon, the earliest preserved collection of Buddhist teachings, was not written to address modern technology, corporate culture, or social media. Yet, it speaks directly to the core mechanisms that drive modern distress. Rather than offering techniques to cope with stress, it offers a radical re-examination of how experience itself is constructed. The Pāli Canon begins with a simple but unsettling observation: dissatisfaction is an inherent feature of unexamined existence. The Buddha did not frame suffering as a personal failure or a flaw in the world, but as a natural consequence of craving, clinging, and misperception. The modern mind, constantly chasing stimulation, validation, and certainty, is unknowingly reenacting the same patterns described over 2,000 years ago. The tools have changed, the psychology has not. What makes the Pāli Canon a potent antidote to modern living is its refusal to provide escapism. It does not promise happiness through accumulation, optimization, or positive thinking. Instead, it invites a deep investigation into impermanence, selfhood, and the automatic reactions of the mind. In doing so, it addresses the root causes of anxiety and burnout rather than their external expressions. It teaches how stress arises moment by moment, how identity is constructed through thought, and how freedom is possible not by controlling life, but by understanding it clearly. In a world addicted to noise, the Pāli Canon points towards silence not as withdrawal, but as insight. In a culture obsessed with becoming, it emphasizes being. In a system that encourages endless consumption, it reveals the peace of non-clinging. These teachings do not require belief. Nor do they depend on cultural or religious identity. They function as a form of inner science, inviting direct observation of experience. The silent crisis of modern living is not merely a problem of lifestyle, it is a misunderstanding of the mind itself. The Pāli Canon offers no quick fixes, but it provides something far more valuable, a map for seeing clearly. In an age overwhelmed by information, this ancient wisdom reminds us that liberation begins not with adding more, but with understanding what is already here. When people hear the term Pāli Canon, they often imagine a distant world of monks, monasteries, and rituals that seem disconnected from the pace and pressures of modern life. It is commonly labeled as a collection of Buddhist texts, a religious archive preserved for scholars or spiritual practitioners. Yet this narrow framing misses its true significance. The Pāli Canon is not merely a historical or devotional record, it is a sophisticated exploration of the human mind, behavior, and suffering, one that speaks with surprising clarity to the psychological struggles of the 21st century. At its core, the Pāli Canon is the earliest and most complete record of the Buddhist teachings, preserved in the Pāli language through centuries of oral transmission. But more importantly, it is a systematic inquiry into how experience is formed and why dissatisfaction arises. Rather than offering metaphysical speculation or moral commandments imposed from above, the Buddha approached human suffering with the precision of a diagnostician. He observed patterns, identified causes, and proposed a path of understanding grounded in direct experience. In this sense, the Pāli Canon functions less like a sacred scripture and more like a manual for understanding the mechanics of distress. The Buddha's most radical insight lies in his treatment of dukkha, often translated as suffering, but more accurately understood as pervasive unsatisfactoriness. Dukkha is not limited to pain, trauma, or dramatic life events. It includes the subtle tension beneath pleasure, the anxiety that accompanies success, and the emptiness that follows gratification. This insight feels uncannily modern. Today's stress rarely comes from physical danger, it arises from mental friction, constant comparison, fear of missing out, and the pressure to maintain an image in a hyper-connected world. The Buddha identified craving, ta, as the central engine of this unsatisfactoriness. Craving is not merely desire for objects, it is the compulsive urge for more stimulation, more recognition, more certainty, more control. In modern consumer culture, this craving is continuously fueled. Advertising teaches the mind to equate happiness with acquisition. Social media transforms attention into currency, rewarding visibility and approval with fleeting dopamine hits. The result is a cycle of wanting that never truly resolves, mirroring precisely the dynamics described in the Pāli Canon. Several suttas articulate this mechanism with striking relevance. The Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the Buddha's first discourse, outlines the Four Noble Truths, presenting dukkha not as a philosophical idea but as an observable reality. It identifies craving as the origin of suffering and introduces the possibility of its cessation not through withdrawal from life, but through understanding how craving operates. In a modern context, this teaching illuminates how stress intensifies when self-worth becomes dependent on external metrics such as likes, followers, productivity, or consumption. The Anatalakha Sutta further deepens this analysis by dismantling the assumption of a stable, controllable self. In a digital world where identity is curated, edited, and performed, this teaching feels particularly relevant. The Sutta reveals that what we call self is a collection of changing processes: body, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. When people cling to online personas or professional identities as who I am, suffering inevitably follows. Anxiety emerges whenever that constructed self is threatened, ignored, or invalidated. Equally powerful is the Alagaddapama Sutta, which warns against clinging even to ideas, views, and teachings themselves. The Buddha compares his teachings to a raft used to cross a river, not something to be carried on one's back. This insight challenges modern tendencies to turn mindfulness, spirituality, or self-improvement into new identities or commodities. When practices meant to liberate become tools for self-enhancement or social signaling, they quietly reinforce the very attachment they were meant to dissolve. The Madhyupika Sutta offers a profound analysis of how perception leads to mental proliferation. It describes how contact gives rise to feeling, feeling to perception, and perception to endless mental narratives. This process mirrors the experience of scrolling through social media. A single image triggers comparison, judgment, memory, and desire, spiraling into dissatisfaction. The sutta shows that suffering does not come from the world itself, but from how the mind reacts, elaborates, and clings. By decoding the Pāli Canon in this way, ancient wisdom becomes a mirror for modern life. The Buddha was not addressing monks alone, he was addressing the structure of human experience. Consumerism and social media are not new problems in essence, they are contemporary expressions of timeless mental habits. The Pāli Canon does not condemn pleasure or technology, but it exposes the cost of unconscious attachment. In an era searching desperately for solutions to stress, burnout, and emptiness, the Pāli Canon offers something rare: clarity. It does not promise comfort through distraction, nor happiness through accumulation. Instead, it reveals freedom through understanding. By seeing how craving and attachment operate in real time, the mind begins to loosen its grip. What emerges is not withdrawal from modern life, but a deeper, steadier way of inhabiting it, one grounded in awareness rather than compulsion. Ancient teachings often appear distant from the concerns of modern life, yet some of the most practical guidance for today's challenges can be found in the early discourses of the Buddha. The suttas preserved in the Pāli Canon were not composed as abstract philosophy, they were responses to real human pain, confusion, and conflict. When read carefully, they reveal a remarkable ability to speak directly to the emotional and psychological struggles of a world marked by loss, distraction, and division. Three suttas in particular, the Kisa-Gautami Sutta, the Satipatthana Sutta, and the Metta Sutta, offer clear, actionable wisdom for navigating everyday life in a complex and hyper-connected age. The Kisa-Gautami Sutta tells a simple yet devastating story. Kisa-Gautami. A young mother loses her only child and is driven nearly mad by grief. Clinging to denial, she carries the dead body from house to house, begging for medicine that will bring her son back to life. When she finally encounters the Buddha, he does not confront her with doctrine or attempt to suppress her pain. Instead, he asks her to bring him a mustard seed from a household that has never experienced death. As she goes from home to home, Kisa-Gautami discovers an inescapable truth: suffering and loss are universal. No family is untouched by death. This realization gently breaks her isolation and allows her grief to transform into understanding. In the modern world, personal loss often unfolds alongside global crises, pandemics, wars, environmental disasters, and economic instability. Grief today is rarely private, it is amplified by constant exposure to tragedy through news and social media. The Kisa-Gautami Sutta offers a crucial perspective: pain becomes unbearable when it is experienced as uniquely mine. By recognizing the shared nature of suffering, the heart softens. This does not diminish grief, but it prevents it from hardening into despair. The sutta teaches perspective not through intellectual reassurance, but through lived insight. We are not alone in our vulnerability. In a time when many feel isolated even while being digitally connected, this recognition restores a sense of shared humanity. While the Kisa-Gautami Sutta addresses emotional pain, the Satipatthana Sutta confronts one of the defining problems of modern life: distraction. Often called the Buddha's foundational discourse on mindfulness, this sutta outlines a methodical training in awareness of the body, feelings, mind, and mental phenomena. Yet its purpose is frequently misunderstood. Satipatthana is not about relaxing the mind or escaping reality, it is about seeing experience clearly as it unfolds, without being carried away by habit and reaction. In a hyper-connected world, attention is constantly pulled outward. Notifications, messages, and infinite content fragment the mind, making sustained focus increasingly difficult. The Satipatthana Sutta offers a radical alternative, the cultivation of continuous, grounded awareness. By learning to observe sensations, emotions, and thoughts as transient processes rather than personal commands, the practitioner regains agency over attention. Focus is no longer forced through discipline alone, it emerges naturally from understanding how distraction arises. This practice becomes a form of mental hygiene, allowing clarity to replace compulsive engagement. Equally important is the Sutta's emphasis on non-identification. Modern stress often intensifies. When thoughts such as "I am failing," "I am not enough," or "I must keep up" go unquestioned. Satipatthana trains the mind to see these narratives as mental events, not absolute truths. In doing so, it creates space to respond wisely rather than react automatically. In practical terms, this means greater presence at work, deeper listening in relationships, and a renewed capacity for creative and ethical action. If mindfulness restores clarity, the Metta Sutta restores warmth. In an age defined by polarization, outrage, and performative conflict, kindness is often dismissed as naive or weak. The Metta Sutta challenges this assumption by presenting loving kindness as a disciplined and courageous practice. It encourages the cultivation of a boundless attitude of goodwill toward oneself and others, regardless of differences, disagreements, or perceived faults. Online discourse in particular has become a breeding ground for dehumanization. Anonymity and algorithmic incentives reward outrage, turning disagreement into hostility. The Metta Sutta offers a countercurrent. By training the heart to wish for the well-being of all beings, seen and unseen, liked and disliked, it interrupts cycles of anger and retaliation. This does not mean avoiding difficult conversations or ignoring injustice. Rather, it means engaging without hatred, recognizing that harmful actions arise from confusion and suffering. In daily life, the practice of metta transforms relationships. It softens self-criticism, reduces reactivity, and fosters resilience in the face of conflict. In a broader sense, it becomes a social practice, reminding us that peace is not created through winning arguments, but through understanding and care. Together, these three suttas form a practical framework for everyday challenges. The Kisagādami Sutta offers perspective in times of loss, the Satipatthana Sutta provides clarity amid distraction, and the Metta Sutta nurtures compassion in a divided world. Far from being relics of the past, these teachings function as living tools, quiet, profound, and urgently relevant to the realities of modern life. In the modern imagination, liberation is often associated with escape. We imagine it as a retreat from responsibility, a withdrawal from society, or a privilege reserved for monks who renounce the world. In a fast-paced culture driven by deadlines, metrics, and constant visibility, the idea of nibbāna can seem irrelevant or unattainable. Yet the Buddha's teaching on liberation was never meant to be confined to monasteries or distant ideals. It was articulated as a practical possibility, one that speaks directly to the pressures, anxieties, and compulsions of everyday life. At its heart, nibbāna does not refer to a place, a mystical state, or an annihilation of human experience. It describes the extinguishing of greed, hatred, and delusion, the mental fires that consume attention and distort perception. In contemporary terms, these fires manifest as chronic stress, compulsive striving, and identity built on performance. When the mind is constantly chasing outcomes or defending an image of self, peace becomes impossible. Liberation, as understood in the Pāli Canon, is the ending of this inner compulsion, not the ending of engagement with the world. One of the most relevant aspects of this teaching is its challenge to outcome obsession. Modern life trains people to measure their worth through results, productivity metrics, social validation, career progression, and public recognition. Success becomes a moving target, always demanding more effort, more visibility, more proof. Even leisure is evaluated for its usefulness or aesthetic value. This relentless Focus on outcomes keeps the mind locked in anticipation of reward in fear of failure. The Buddha offered a radically different orientation. Rather than encouraging withdrawal from action, he emphasized freedom from attachment to results. Action is still taken, responsibilities are still fulfilled, but the compulsive identification with success and failure is gradually loosened. This shift transforms effort from a source of tension into an expression of clarity. Work becomes something one does, not something one is. In this way, the teachings on liberation restore dignity and balance to everyday activity. A key strategy in this transformation is the cultivation of right view, the understanding that all conditioned phenomena are impermanent and unreliable as sources of lasting satisfaction. When this insight is applied to modern performance culture, its impact is profound. Praise and criticism lose their absolute power. Achievements are appreciated without being clung to. Setbacks are faced without collapsing into self-blame. This does not lead to indifference, it leads to resilience. The mind becomes flexible rather than brittle, responsive rather than reactive. Another essential aspect of liberation is the gradual release of the need to constantly perform. Social media and professional environments encourage continuous self-presentation. The pressure to appear competent, happy, and successful creates a split between inner experience and outer image. Over time, this division generates exhaustion and alienation. The Buddha's path addresses this directly by dismantling the assumption of a fixed self that must be maintained and defended. When identity is seen as a process rather than a possession, the burden of performance naturally lightens. Practices rooted in mindfulness and wisdom reveal how the sense of I is continuously constructed through thought, memory, and anticipation. Seeing this clearly does not erase individuality, but it frees the mind from the belief that one's value is fragile or dependent on constant validation. In practical terms, this allows for more authentic communication, healthier boundaries, and the courage to step out of roles that no longer serve genuine well-being. Crucially, liberation in the Buddha's teaching is not about escaping the world. It is about transforming the way we relate to it. The liberated mind still experiences pleasure and pain, gain and loss, connection and separation. What changes is the absence of clinging. Without clinging, experiences flow without leaving deep wounds or compulsive traces. Life is met with openness rather than resistance, curiosity rather than fear. This transformation has ethical implications. When actions are no longer driven by craving or aversion, compassion arises naturally. Competition gives way to cooperation. Success is no longer measured by domination or accumulation, but by the reduction of suffering, both within oneself and in others. In a fast-paced world, this form of liberation is quietly revolutionary. It challenges the assumption that speed equals progress, and that value must be constantly proven. Ultimately, the Buddha's vision of liberation offers a different definition of freedom. It is not freedom from work, relationships, or responsibility, but freedom within them. It is the capacity to engage fully without being consumed, to act decisively without being driven by fear, and to rest inwardly even amid activity. In a world that rarely slows down, this inner freedom is not a luxury, it is a necessity. Ancient wisdom becomes truly meaningful only when it is lived. The enduring power of the Pāli Canon does not lie in its historical significance or philosophical depth alone, but in its capacity to be integrated into ordinary life. In a world shaped by speed, uncertainty, and constant stimulation, these teachings offer not an escape from reality, but a way of inhabiting it with clarity and steadiness. The question is no longer whether ancient truths are relevant, but how they can be practiced simply, realistically, and consistently in the context of modern life. One of the most accessible entry points is meditation, understood not as a mystical exercise but as a training in attention. From the suttas, especially those related to mindfulness and breathing, we can extract practices that fit seamlessly into daily routines. A simple starting point is mindful breathing, taking a few minutes each day to sit quietly and observe the natural rhythm of the breath. there is no need to control or manipulate it. The practice is merely to know when the breath is long, when it is short, and when the mind wanders. Each moment of recognition is already a moment of awakening. This seemingly modest habit gradually retrains the mind to rest in the present rather than being pulled endlessly into past regrets or future anxieties. Beyond formal meditation, the Pāli Canon emphasizes mindfulness in action. Everyday activities, walking, eating, speaking, even scrolling, can become opportunities for awareness. One practical habit is to pause briefly before responding to messages or notifications, noticing the impulse to react immediately. This pause, inspired by the Buddha's emphasis on clear comprehension, sampajana, creates space between stimulus and response. Over time, this space becomes a refuge. Decisions are made more wisely, emotions are felt without being overwhelming, and life regains a sense of intentionality. Another powerful practice derived from the suttas is reflection on impermanence. This does not mean cultivating pessimism, but realism. Taking a moment at the end of the day to reflect on how experiences arose and passed away, pleasant or unpleasant, softens attachment. Success is enjoyed without clinging, and difficulties are faced without despair. In 2025, where identity is often tied to transient metrics such as productivity or online validation, this reflection becomes a form of psychological liberation. It reminds us that no moment defines us permanently. Equally important is the cultivation of ethical awareness, not as moral rigidity but as alignment. The suttas repeatedly show that inner peace is inseparable from how we live and relate to others. Simple commitments, speaking truthfully, acting with kindness, consuming mindfully, stabilize the mind more effectively than any technique. In a divided world, choosing non-harm in speech and action becomes a quiet but radical act. These habits reduce inner conflict and build trust, both inwardly and outwardly. For those drawn to go deeper, the Pāli Canon invites personal exploration rather than blind belief. The Buddha consistently encouraged inquiry, reflection, and direct experience. Modern readers can begin with accessible translations of key suttas, reading slowly and contemplatively rather than as an academic exercise. Short passages, read repeatedly, often reveal more than large volumes consumed quickly. Listening to teachings by respected scholars and practitioners can also help contextualize the texts, bridging ancient language with contemporary experience. Trustworthy resources include well-regarded translations of the Pāli Canon, collections of selected suttas with commentary, and teachings grounded in early Buddhist sources rather than later interpretations alone. What matters most is approaching these texts not as distant scripture, but as living guidance. The question to carry while reading is simple: how does this describe my own experience right now? When the teachings are tested against lived reality, their relevance becomes unmistakable. As we move further into an uncertain future, the value of these teachings becomes even clearer. The Pāli Canon does not promise a world without disruption or difficulty. What it offers is resilience, the capacity to remain balanced amid change. It shows that genuine inner peace is not dependent on external stability, but on understanding the nature of the mind. This understanding allows one to meet uncertainty without panic, loss without collapse, and success without intoxication. In 2025 and beyond, the challenges humanity faces are unlikely to slow down. Technology will continue to evolve, crises will continue to arise, and the pace of life may only increase. Against this backdrop, the ancient truths preserved in the Pāli Canon stand quietly, offering something rare, a path that does not age. By integrating simple practices, cultivating ethical clarity, and engaging directly with these teachings, individuals can rediscover a form of peace that is not fragile or conditional. These truths have endured not because they belong to the past, but because they address the timeless patterns of the human heart. When lived with sincerity, they do more than calm the mind, they transform how life is understood and lived. In doing so, they offer a profound reassurance: even in a fast-changing world, freedom is still possible, here and now.